It's not much of a surprise, but taking multiple fantasy pieces from offenses we project to do well is a pretty good strategy. Today, I'm highlighting my 5 favorite offenses to stack in 2024 fantasy football drafts. But before we dig in, head over to 4for4.com, use promo code YouTube for 25% off any subscription plan. With one of the tightest target trees in all of football, the Cowboys remain one of the most stackable offenses in fantasy. Leading things off at the very top of drafts, we have wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, who dominated the wide receiver room in 2023. His 29.2 target share ranked 4th in the league, while his 88.7% route participation ranked 7th, and his 37.5% of his team's yardage ranked 3rd. This was far from just empty usage. Both his 20.3 expected fantasy points and his 19.9 actual fantasy points landed him only behind Keenan Allen and Tyreek Hill, respectively. We should continue to see very similar usage in 2024, with the only move the team made were to add Ryan Flournoy in the 6th round and the release and subsequent retirement of Michael Gallup. Pre-cut day reports have mentioned that Flournoy is sitting on the roster bubble. This lack of movement also hints to veteran Brandon Cooks once again operating as a boom or bust option. With no real wide receiver 2 option behind Lamb last season, Cooks emerged as a solid option, running his most routes since the 2020 season and logging 30-plus routes in each of the team's final 6 weeks. With his ability to line up in the slot or out wide, there's a good chance he can replicate his 77.4% route participation from last year, which planted him within the top 40 most utilized options across the position. Any sort of improvement out of Jalen Tolbert could eat into Cook's high-end outcomes, but it certainly wouldn't negatively impact Dak Prescott. Dak narrowly missed winning the MVP award last season, thanks in large part to a Week 14 offensive collapse in which he managed only 134 yards passing. Outside of that performance, things were quite smooth in real life and fantasy. Prescott finished in the top 10 at the position for the 4th time in his career, putting together 4,500-plus yards and 36 touchdowns while registering the 2nd lowest turnover-worthy play rate in the league. He shouldn't be kept out of the conversation as a top 7 fantasy quarterback this season, and with how far apart the skill position players' ADPs are, they are easily stackable. With preseason news emerging about Jahmyr Gibbs dealing with a hamstring strain in the 2nd week of August, it presents fantasy drafters with an opportunity to go all in on the Lions' offense, and I'm not opposed. According to our underdog ADP tool over at 4for4, we have seen Gibbs trend well out of the 1st round into the beginning of the 2nd, and sometimes he drops into the middle of the 2nd. This is likely something that Detroit Lions fans have noticed because now you can start your drafts with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Gibbs back-to-back. This presents your fantasy squad with one of the best floor plays and best ceiling plays right off the bat. In his 3rd NFL season, St. Brown once again eclipsed 90 receptions, and this time really outdid himself with a 119, 1,510 touchdown season on 161 targets, the 5th most in the league. He's one of the most consistent and valuable assets in all of fantasy, but particularly in PPR leagues, where he scored less than 15 points in 3 of 16 games. There's no reason to believe that's not replicable, considering tight end Sam Laporta gobbled up 120 targets and still didn't impact St. Brown's zone-beating role. Speaking of Laporta, he is locked into the middle of the 3rd round, and you can really do something fun here. You can reasonably stack the top 3 players on a Lions team that is projected to score the 2nd most points in the NFL this season. Is it crazy? Yes, a little bit, but hear me out. Of the 1,604 half PPR fantasy points the Lions accrued across every single position, including kicker and quarterback, the trio accounted for 683.8 of them, or 42.6%. When we remove the quarterbacks and kickers, the percentage jumps to 56.5%. If Gibbs continues to progress as a sophomore, we could be looking at 2/3 of the fantasy points scored on one of the best offenses in the league, distributed between only 3 players. Chief stacks depend incredibly on where you're drafting from, and you'll often need to luck into the top options. While there may be cases that you could select Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco, and Patrick Mahomes in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, their ADPs make that unlikely, so you'll need to see how your draft falls. Things may have been made a little easier as of late, as it seems as though Hollywood Brown is still questionable for the beginning of the season, while potential Rashee Rice suspension seems more and more likely to get pushed into the 2025 season. While this clears the runway for rookie Xavier Worthy to get a better hold of the potential every-down player, this also gives Rashee Rice a better opportunity to expand on a screen-heavy role in 2023. You can absorb a ton of the Chiefs' passing attack by taking Kelce and Mahomes in the 3rd and 4th rounds, and bringing Rice along in the 5th or 6th round. Make sure you have a backup plan, though, because all 3 of their ADPs fluctuate wildly from draft to draft. A stack of the Bengals depends entirely on your willingness or ability to take Jamar Chase in the 1st round. one of the absolute best wide receivers in the NFL today, and when his quarterback is at full health, he's not far behind the top of his fantasy position either. The connection between the two has proven to be one of the most valuable combos in all of Fantasyland, and Chase should be treated as a very high ceiling acquisition in drafts. The wide receiver has multi-touchdown, 150-plus yard upside in any given week. And thanks to the proliferation of rushing quarterbacks, he can be paired relatively easily. 15 years ago, options like Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, and Dak Prescott may have been the first three quarterbacks off the board with ADPs in the opening rounds of the draft. Nowadays, they slide down boards due to their lack of rushing, no matter how good of a real quarterback they are. Burrow would have to have an otherworldly season to finish as a top 5 QB option, but he has done it before, as recently as the 2022 season. It's understandable why risk-averse drafters would prefer to fade Burrow due to his injury history, at least recently, but he offers a type of fantasy upside that is hard to come by with these non-rushing QBs in the NFL. And you can set up a sort of mega stack by grabbing the team's wide receiver 2 directly ahead of Burrow. It would be easy to completely throw out T. Higgins' 2023 season, and your confidence in drafting him in 2024 is likely going to rely on your willingness to do that. While his week-to-week upside is not as high as it would be if he ended up moving on to a new team and out of the shadow of Jamar Chase, he can still return to form and deliver big weeks for fantasy teams willing to take the risk. Higgins has a wide receiver 22 and a wide receiver 17 finish on his resume, popping up for 20-plus fantasy points on 6 occasions over that 2-year span. Stacking the Packers offense in 2024 is both a good idea and one that feels nearly impossible. While the pass catchers and quarterback are nicely spread out in ADP, guessing the perfect solution to their spread-out target tree is rough. According to draft boards, fantasy managers have pegged Jaden Reed as the wide receiver to roster as he goes in the 7th round, but I'm not so sure. With how spread out this passing distribution projects, I think I'd rather swing at Christian Watson and deal with the occasional down week. In 9 games with Watson on the field last season, Reed averaged only 6.5 fantasy points and failed to reach 50 yards receiving 6 times. Because of Jordan Love's willingness to spread the ball out, not a single receiver reached a 17% target share in 2023, which makes me lean towards simply selecting the receivers who are going later, like Watson. Through 18 games of NFL action, Watson has scored 17-plus half PPR fantasy points on 6 occasions and had a wild stretch of 4 games back in 2022, in which he scored 7 touchdowns while averaging 19.5 yards per catch. He is my initial target to eventually pair with Love, but I'm not ignoring the stack if I miss out on him. It's certainly going to be a risky floor for Musgrave on a week-to-week basis, but if he can flash his big play ability with enough consistency, he will be a great boom-bust option that offers more upside than most of the players going in this ADP range. Basically, it's a free-for-all when stacking the Green Bay Packers, but when you end up with Love as your quarterback, I would be aiming to grab any of these pass catchers at or beyond ADP.